Hi there, I'm Ray. A very warm welcome to my channel and to my wrap-up of the books that I read in October this year. As I mentioned in my last couple of videos, I haven't been in a particularly strong reading zone for the last 3 months or so. October definitely falls into that category. I read 3 books in October, so this should be a fairly short wrap-up. As it was Victober last month and I was attempting to concentrate on reading Victorian literature, I'll start off by talking about the one Victorian book which I did finish in October. I read Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon. This was, as I recall, for the prompt of reading a Victorian sensation novel, and I also thought it was going to fall into the category of the prompt about reading a book that had a woman as the protagonist. You know, I guess that because the book was called Lady Audley's Secret, so I thought that she would be the main character in it, she is not. I enjoyed this book, but I didn't love it. So I think the only proper work of sensation fiction that I've read before was A Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, and I absolutely adored that. Like, I literally remember staying up for most of the night because I couldn't put it down. I was so gripped by it. I'm really looking forward to reading more Wilkie Collins, kind of especially after having read Lady Audley's Secret. Like, I did enjoy this. I found the writing very easy to read. I was interested to know what happened next, but I feel like its one fatal flaw was that it wasn't a great mystery, because for most of the novel you already knew what had happened and you were really just walking along with the actual protagonist, who's this guy called Roberts. Can't remember what he was called, and I literally finished this book like a week ago. That kind of tells you how connected to the characters I was. Yeah, you just followed him around as he was trying to solve the mystery. So I wasn't as gripped and intrigued to find out what happened next as I expected I was going to be, because it was more about, okay, so how do all these jigsaw puzzle pieces fit in place, rather than what even are the pieces. I have no idea, but I want to find out. I thought this novel had an interesting look at femininity, but it wasn't a perspective which I liked. So women in this book, especially Lady Audley, are seen as being kind of manipulative, dangerous controllers of men, which was an interesting contrast to the angel in the home type image of women, which often exists in Victorian literature, and was kind of playing off of that, I think. So Lady Audley kind of acts the angel in the home, whilst secretly inside being this kind of manipulative woman who will use her skills to get what she wants in life. But I think what irked me about it is just the portrayal of women as being dangerous to men, whereas of course the reality for women in the Victorian period and today is that women are far more in danger of manipulative men than men are of manipulative women. Also, the ending of the novel, it tied everything up really nicely in a bow, which I love in Victorian fiction. That's definitely something which I find really comforting and really enjoyable. Like, I like a plot where you find out what's happened to everybody at the end of a story, but I wasn't quite convinced by the ending. I feel like there could probably have been a better, more interesting or more innovative end compared to the one that she chose. It kind of ended up feeling a bit obvious to me. So I think I gave this 3 stars. Like, I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed all the time that I was with it as a book. It was a very easy listen, it was entertaining, but it wasn't something that I would particularly be in a rush to go back to and reread. Although I didn't finish it, the other book which I was working my way through during October, and which I'm still carrying on with now, was for Victober, and it was Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens. I am absolutely loving this. Like, I'm so enjoying it. Basically, the story begins with this dead body being found in the Thames, and it then goes on to look at this kind of absolutely massive web of characters who are connected to this dead body that's been found in various ways, and looks at like the interplay between these characters, trying to work out how this murder happened and what the aftermath of the murder is and its effect on the lives of various people. There is an enormous cast of characters in Our Mutual Friend. Like, I started off reading this in hard copy. I was reading my mum's edition while I was back in the UK, and then when I left the UK I switched over to the audiobook because I feel like I steal too many of my mum's books, and I'm trying to be better at not doing that. And the audio edition, actually, I'm listening for free on Audible because I already have a subscription and it's one of the ones that's in their new Audible library. I'm so enjoying it. I'm actually enjoying it more as an audiobook than I was enjoying it when I was reading it by myself. And I think that is partly just because I find that the narrator doing the different voices is helping me to distinguish between the different characters, of which there are a lot. Like at around page 250 to 300, Dickens is still introducing new characters who are clearly going to be central characters to the plot, which is kind of crazy. I think it's about 900 pages in total, but it's just so good. It's just everything that I love about Dickens. I try and read one Dickens a year. Last year I only read A Christmas Carol, so even though I loved it, it was a reread. So it was kind of, I didn't have that experience of reading a new Dickens. And what I'm loving about Our Mutual Friend is that I'm really into the story now. Like, I'm really gripped and intrigued by the story, which didn't happen so much in the one Dickens I read before that, which was Martin Chuzzlewit. That was like okay, but it definitely wasn't one of my favourite Dickens, whereas Our Mutual Friend is certainly shaping up as a potential to be one of my favourite Dickens. The characters are just like phenomenal, just only Dickens. There's such a range, they're so eccentric, they're so engaging, like their turns of phrase and stuff, highly entertaining, but the story itself as well is really intriguing. I so often find with Dickens that you get to the end, I get to the end of a Dickens, and quite shortly after the end of a Dickens, I've forgotten how it even ended. It's almost irrelevant, but at the time the journey feels so important, and I'm definitely really sucked into the journey at the moment. Like, I really want to know what happens. I'm really enjoying following the characters. Some of them are really turning into super evil baddies, and like I dislike them, and I'm excited to see them get their comeuppance later on. Some of them I'm super fond of. The other two books that I read in October, one of them was a quick audiobook listen. It was called Carry On Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. I have got the Stephen Fry collection on Audible of him reading like a load of different P.G. Wodehouse books, and I'm just listening to them in the background as a comfort listen when I want to, and honestly they're like an instant pick-me-up. There's just like a jar of joy that you put in your ears and open the jar, and like instantly the world seems like a better place. I am adoring them. They're so frothy and light and frivolous, really, in many ways. Just these silly stories, the plot of which is quite similar, although I significantly preferred Carry On Jeeves that I've just read to the only other P.G. Wodehouse I've ever read, which was The Inimitable Jeeves, the first one in the Stephen Fry collection, because the plots did feel a bit more varied. So in The Inimitable Jeeves, I'm pretty sure it was like Bertie Wooster, who's the main character, this sort of upper class fop, and then his butler Jeeves, and Bertie's friend Bingo Little. I'm pretty sure every single story was about Bingo Little, and it started to get a bit repetitive, whereas in Carry On Jeeves there were just a greater variety of stories, a greater variety of characters, and yeah, that made it more entertaining and interesting. It was also just unbelievably funny. I was just laughing aloud the whole way through, really. The language, the turns of phrase, the observations, it's just so witty, so funny, just honestly an utter delight. And I'm really enjoying having this as an audiobook that's just on the go in the background all the time. And sometimes when I'm feeling a bit tired or a little bit down or whatever it might be, I can just put that on. It kind of like, all the stories are so simplistic that even if you finish off halfway through one of the little stories in it and don't come back to it for another 3 weeks, you pick up where you left off and remember it immediately, because there's like no complexity to the plot line at all. But yeah, such a delight. I'm so happy to have got into P.G. Wodehouse. It's one of those authors who I always knew that I would love, but had just, for whatever reason, not got round to starting. And I'm glad to have started it now, knowing I have my whole lifetime ahead of me to keep reading and listening to and enjoying them, because there's absolutely loads of them, and I find that very comforting. It makes me feel like the world is a good place. Then lastly, I don't know how long I'm going to hold this up for because it's pretty heavy. The final book that I read was not this entire thing. This is a collection of books. You can see how much I read for the first book. It was a book called The Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula Le Guin. This is the first book in the Earthsea series, which is a collection of books set in this world called Earthsea. They're a kind of children's fantasy series. I believe they were written in the 1960s. They're quite famous, and I've been meaning to get around to reading them for ages. I got this absolutely gorgeous edition gifted to me by one of my friends for my birthday. It's got beautiful illustrations. She wrote me a really, really lovely note in the beginning, which just reminded me how special it is to receive books like this as an object now is so special to me in a way that had I read the story on Kindle or listened to it as an audiobook, I just would never have the same connection with it as I do with this one. So that was really lovely, and I really enjoyed the experience of reading it out of such a beautiful edition, even though I ended up taking it on the plane with me in my hand luggage, and it was a bit ridiculously heavy for carrying around on planes, but I had to put it in my hand luggage because it was too heavy for me to put in my suitcase. Anyway, yeah, I really loved this. It was a really interesting read. I'm going to put it down now and talk about it with it down on my lap because it's a bit too heavy to hold up. The Wizard of Earthsea is a story of a boy called Ged who discovers that he is a wizard, and it's basically a Bildungsroman or coming-of-age novel about him growing up. It's got a lot of tropes that I really enjoy in fantasy literature in it. So it has, for example, him attending a magic school, it has lots of voyages, and especially one of the things I really, really like that I was kind of reminded of how much I enjoy is in a journey story when you get those rest points, so the times where they meet up with a friend or they receive the kindness of strangers, and you get these little like hallowed safe spaces carved out along the long journey. I just find those so special. It was like in Lord of the Rings when they get to Rivendell, that feeling that you get when you can just, you know, your character is safe and you can just like rest for a moment. They were done really, really nicely in this story, and I enjoyed that. But what I actually really loved about this story, and I didn't realise it until I got to the end of the story, is what Le Guin was doing with the plot. So something that I enjoy in fantasy, which I feel is really well done, is when it kind of literalizes a human experience that we can't physically show in the real world, and fantasy takes the fact that it exists within the imagination and can therefore make these things real. So some of my other examples of books that do this are His Dark Materials. I love that, one of my favourite trilogies of books ever, and in those books people have a demon, which is basically like their soul made into an animal that goes around with them, and I just think that's a really fascinating concept. In this book, Le Guin was looking at the split between the good and evil within us and how we cope with our shadow side, basically, and it sort of follows Ged's. He makes this kind of terrible mistake. He commits this act which is committed from a place of selfishness, from a place of wanting to show off and wanting to be better than others. And he then spends the rest of the book atoning for this bad thing that he has done. And it looks at how he has to cope with this kind of darker side of his nature. And I found that really, really fascinating. I think it was explored in a really interesting way. And in my version, there was also a little afterword that Le Guin had written herself, where she said about how she was deliberately not writing a war fantasy. Like so many fantasy books are about war, and you know, the outcome of the book is the winning of the war as though that is the end, whereas she says that this book is not about the winning of a war, but about the beginning of a life and about coming to terms with who we are and coping with who we are. So it's very much about internal conflict rather than external conflict, which I really, really enjoy as an idea. I must say, when I was actually reading it, I didn't initially pick up on this, and therefore just kind of found the plot a little bit slow for quite a lot of the book. It didn't have super, super rich language, which I often enjoy in a really slow book, and I wasn't 100% sure maybe where it was going, so I didn't adore it, but then looking back on it, I now do. There's some other cool things that Le Guin did in here. One of them is simply for its time. This book is quite forward-thinking in terms of the fact that the majority of the characters, and certainly the main characters in this book, are all people of colour. There's also a lot of cool linguistic stuff going on in here, and I am hoping that as the books go on, this side of it will grow and be something that she explores more. So the magic system in the country of Earthsea is based on knowing the true names of things. There's this belief that there's like an old ancient language where things have a true name, and if you know the true name of things, that gives you the power to control them. And people too have true names, and it's like a sign of deep, deep trust in somebody if you share with them your true name rather than the kind of like nickname that you go around with in real life. And it just kind of this view of the world just rings quite true, I think, with the way that I see the world as well. Like, I do feel that people and even things have this true self, this true centre, which our language doesn't have the words to express and which our eyes can't necessarily really see, but which we can kind of feel in our hearts. And I felt like the Earthsea books portrayed that in a really nice way. So yeah, basically it was a super beautiful, really interesting, really wise, also very ecological message. The magic system is very much about balance, about not causing disruption, and about the characters learning that instead of trying to control everything yourself through magic, it's more important to be able to just let things be, and that you can really like mess up the planet if you don't do that, which is, you know, a powerful message to be reading around the same time as COP26, and just in general with the whole climate crisis that we're facing on Earth at the moment. So that was also really lovely. Yeah, basically it was one of those wonderful books where it just has loads and loads of food for thought. So those are all the books that I read in October. Like I said, not too many, but I often think this when I make these videos on BookTube. Before I did BookTube, 3 books in a month would have been like a good reading month. So I need to remember to not beat myself up just because I'm constantly now bombarded by videos of people who read like 11 books in a month. It is also very normal to just read 3 books in a month. So yeah, do let me know down below what you read during October, if you read anything great for victober or just anything great in general. Thank you as always for watching. I really appreciate your being here and I look forward to seeing you soon in another video. Bye bye.